This is Story Talk, a series of online conversations featuring storytellers and artists from different parts of the world, especially curated for the 5th anniversary of StoryFest Singapore. Today, I'll be speaking with author Susan Perrow, and we'll be chatting about storytelling and well-being. Hi, Susan. Thanks for joining me on Story Talk.
Hello, Kamini. Beautiful to be here. Thank you.
So, Susan, you're a storyteller, an author, and you've written many books about storytelling and their therapeutic values, the healing powers, and so much of story for well-being. Could you share a little bit more about your background in this work using stories specifically for well-being?
People are often surprised to hear this, that my first 30 years of life, I was a maths honours student and I had no interest. Creative writing was my least liked subject at school. I did begin to read stories till I became a mother and had 3 sons very quickly in a row. And that was probably my first introduction to the importance of stories, when I was reading stories to my sons. And then I fell into this work simply by one little story that I read out of a book one night, and my 7-year-old boy began to get up early in the morning and do secret jobs around the house, because that's what the story was about. And that really, I think the scientist in me made me go, this really needs to be taken note of. And then I began to start creating stories for my sons, and I was a teacher. I began making up stories for my class, experimenting, you could say, and then documenting how did it work. And when I look back now, I mean, this is more than 30 years ago, and the documentation to do with this work, because my genre, for people who, I probably should have said a bit more about this, I write therapeutic stories for unique personal situations, sometimes just for one person, a child, a teenager, an adult, or maybe for a whole community group, sometimes even for the full global crisis. I've written quite a few environmental stories. That's one of my latest projects. So I craft stories to really try and to help shift different challenges, help build hope, build resilience, motivate, soothe, many things that a therapeutic story can do. Sometimes miraculously they may heal a situation, but most often they can offer a little bit of help here and there. And it's story medicine, you could say, in 2 words.
Your recent book is called Stories to Light the Night, and it's just come out, and we can see it there right behind you, the beautiful cover.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about this book and the stories within this book?
Well, this is a book that's been a long time in process. I felt quite overwhelmed by it, and it wasn't until I put out a message. I've got quite a big network around the world now, because my books are in many languages and I've traveled to many countries. I put the message out, could anyone make a contribution out of their lived experience of creating a story for grief and loss, for whatever age. So this book isn't just for children, it's for all ages. And the response was quite overwhelming, which was wonderful. I have 34 contributors to this book. There's 94 stories in the book. More than 50 are mine, but the contributors from their rich backgrounds of working as nurses, psychologists, social workers, some with refugees, some in the psychology field, so on. So that's what helped push me forward into taking this on. And it's not just to do with grief and loss of personal, family or friends. It's to do with loss of place, loss of family connection, stories for children who may have parents who've separated, or they may be adopted or fostered out, loss of place for people who lose their houses in bushfires and floods and so on, and loss of a pet, loss of health and well-being, even just that, loss of mobility, loss of eyesight, many different stories. And then the sad section is the echo loss and echo grief that you would have hoped we wouldn't be needing to write about. But I've got 8 stories there, really encouraging an active hope response to our difficult environmental issues. So that's it. The Stories to Light the Night comes from I lived and worked in East Africa, and often I would meet someone, and in Kiswahili they would say, hadithi, mwanga, usiku, stories like the night. And it was a deep cultural wisdom and a sacred respect for stories. And I always like, when I run my trainings, I like to start by acknowledging the cultural wisdoms that sit as a foundation to my work, to your work, to all the work we do today, has been for thousands of years carried with cultures, with story-centered approaches to learning and knowing.
So I'm sure you've worked on many different projects using storytelling for well-being, for therapeutic purposes, for healing. You know, there must have been some learning points as well as a lot of challenges and difficulties during the process of executing these projects. Are you able to share a little bit of, one of these projects and some of the learning points or key takeaways from working with stories specifically for well-being?
Let me start with some challenges. Traveling in different countries, finding a bridge to the cultural connections. I've done many trips to China, mainland China, and there were some big challenges that came out there. I found that some people attending my trainings were then using the stories not in what I thought was an ethical way, in more manipulative way, to force their children to, for example, practice piano at the age of 3 years old, or to eat this particular food. And it was very good for me. It was just before I was writing my second book, this one here, The Therapeutic Storytelling, and it really forced me to look, what is it that makes a story ethically therapeutic, and what is it that makes it manipulative? And so that was a good challenge, very important one for me. Also, political issues might arise. I was once asked, did I have any ideas to help children love their country more than their parents? Now, that's a very strong political issue in the country I had mentioned. I think I love running my trainings because I have 10 or more hours or a few days to really explore with a small group of people. I think one of my biggest challenges is short interviews. I have so many examples of where stories have helped here or there. And so I find that quite a challenge. And also giving big keynotes. I was the keynote 3 times in 2 days in a big national conference in America. Some special experiences have been when I get feedback saying, this story has changed my life or changed the life of my child. A little story that helped a child want to work with a pencil and learn to write in classroom actually stopped the child being expelled because the story was so simple, about a pencil that sang to him to encourage him to make beautiful shapes instead of doing lots of scribbles. And the teacher had accused him of scribbling like a baby, and then he'd started ripping things up and breaking pencils. And this little story that I didn't write, I helped the mother write, it changed his whole approach to being in the classroom. And when you get feedback like that, I've been emailed by a teenager in Croatia thanking me for visiting Croatia, running a seminar so her mother could write a story, 17-year-old teenager, to help her accept the use of a wheelchair. And this teenager wrote and thanked me for that. That's what really keeps me very motivated with this work. And one little extra personal highlight, well, I've got a good friend. He's an engineer, friend of my husband's, and very sadly, one of his sons was killed in an accident. And his 10-year-old grandson was very angry. You can understand the emotions after this, but the son was taking out the anger on the mother, who was dealing with bringing up the other children and dealing with her own grief. And I said to my friend, I would like to try and write this 10-year-old a story. Now, the engineer in him, the skeptic, thought, how could a story make a difference? And he was very reluctant to even get me involved. And this boy used to work with his father making drones and flying drones. And I wrote a story using that as the main character. And it's true, I don't have time to share it here. It is in my latest book. The story helped shift his behavior from being angry to feeling motivated to do experiments and create new things to help his father feel proud of who he was. Now, just the response from my friend, he just melted. And it's those moments that are very satisfying.
Last year was a very difficult year for many of us around the world, and it still continues to be a very testing, trying, and challenging time. You had an amazing project with a Little Gnome character that sort of went viral around the world.
It did. And viral in a good way, not in an awful COVID-19 way. Yes.
In a good, positive, helpful way, and translated into so many different languages. For those viewers and listeners who are not familiar with your character of the Little Gnome and their story, would you be able to share a little bit more with us, Susan?
Yes, I would love to, because when the lockdown began in Australia, I thought to myself as a writer, what can I do? I can't be a nurse. I can't offer my services that way. So I wrote this, and also I was hearing from friends and neighbors, oh, this is terrible. We have to be at home. Our children are complaining. And also they were telling their children, well, we have to be home because there's scary germs out there and they could come to get you. And I felt little children shouldn't be hearing this message. And I thought perhaps a story can change the message that's being put out. So I wrote this little story, a little gnome who had to stay home. It's got lots of rhyme. And he listens to the wisdom of Mother Tree. His little home is down in the roots of the tree. But Mother Tree keeps saying, trust me, soon you will be free. Trust me, trust me. And so little gnome trusts, and he finds many things to do in his home. And then there's a rhyme and a song. Little gnome can sing, little gnome can dance and sing. Little gnome can paint and draw, do somersaults across the floor. Little gnome can clean and cook and curl up with a picture book. Many more verses. I wrote it. I put it for free on my Facebook, on my website. Then on my social media sites, I put out a little message, just in black and white typing, story for free. Perhaps it may help. Well, 43,000 hits that had just in the next 24 hours. You're right, it spun around the world because I think so many teachers and parents and therapists were thinking, what are we going to do? What can we offer the children? Within 2 weeks, it was in 26 languages. They're all on my website, so anyone listening from different countries can click and download their language version. It was made into little films. It was made into shadow puppet play by a teacher in Mexico. Australian film company made a little film voluntarily. The whole film team did thousands of dollars of work. That's all available on the website. And then there's also been follow-up stories of how by the end of the year, the lantern for Little Gnome was growing dim, and how can he find a way to make the light bright again. And in many ways, this wasn't just for little children. I've got some friends older than me, and they have said, this story has helped me so much. So it's a beautiful example of how a story you think you're writing for a little, for a certain age, but stories can touch hearts of so many. And that's what this did.
Thank you so much for sharing that story with all of us. And you still continue to share that. And we still need the little lantern and the light of the little gnome. We all need that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes.
So Susan, I'm sure you're working on a new upcoming project, or you have something that's a work in progress. What are you up to nowadays?
I'm so glad you asked this. I was contacted by an app engineer living in Europe. He's an Australian, but he's based in Europe, and he's been developing apps for all kinds of Dubrovnik city maps and Copenhagen Zoo map, and so different apps. He also has a daughter, and he has my books. And he said, why don't you have an app with audio versions of all your stories? And my response was, well, because no one's asked or offered to help me do that. And he said, me, I would love to do that. And so we are slowly working together with my publisher. There'll be more than 200 stories, and there'll be audio versions of all of them. And I think, especially in today's age with so much screen time for children, even though, of course, the most perfect way to share a story is to either tell it or read it, at least with audio versions, children can listen. Their imaginations can still do so much of the work. So I'm very excited about this. It'll probably take a year to get it up and running.
Thanks so much, Susan. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
I've been speaking with author Susan Perrow, and we've been talking about storytelling and well-being. If you enjoyed our conversation, there's plenty more videos on the Story Talk series hosted on the YouTube channel for StoryFest Singapore.